I appreciate you being here tonight. Um, First off, my name is Reid McCain, and I was a police officer for 14 years. I spent 12 of those years here with the Marshall Police Department. I was a patrol officer, field training officer, spent 7 years in the crime scene unit. I've been a patrol sergeant, patrol lieutenant. I had a vast experience with the police department, and in 2008 decided that I wanted to go to law school and take the next step in my criminal justice career. I believe that some of the things I had learned as a police officer could help me be a good prosecutor, and some of the things I learned as a police officer while working with the DA's office, I believe that I could take and develop those skills and become a successful prosecutor. Mr. Solomon says I've got a cop mentality. I guess is a bad thing. Is that a bad thing to have a cop mentality? Are cops bad? I don't think so. I would agree with him that to an extent I might have that because I have actually arrested, investigated, and prosecuted every crime there is, from Class C misdemeanors all the way to capital murder. Okay, I've been out there in the streets and I've learned what it takes to develop probable cause. And as a prosecutor, I know what it takes to develop a case to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. So one thing I learned as a prosecutor and former police officer, that there's a huge gap, a disconnect, if you will, between law enforcement and a DA's office. And when I worked here, I've testified in the 71st District Court, I don't know how many times, 7,500 times. I worked closely with the DA's office. I thought that I knew the job of the DA's office. Well, when I became a prosecutor, it was funny. I would talk to some of my colleagues, and they would ask about these horrible cases that were brought over. And I'd ask them, well, have you talked to the officers about these cases? No. Okay, well, if you don't talk to them, they think they're doing a good job. And the police, if the DA's office isn't prosecuting them, thinks the DA's office is doing a bad job. Well, I do have that experience to bridge that gap, to work with our law enforcement. One of the things I would want to do as the elected district attorney is to teach classes, to teach legislative updates, to work with our law enforcement. The other night in our debate, Mr. Solomon said that his office is doing that. I'm not aware of any officers that have been trained by the Harrison County DA's office. I'm not aware of any ongoing, continuing legal education, but that's something that I want to do. And, you know, folks, every 2 years, our legislators create new laws. So I think it's important that our law enforcement here in Harrison County know what your local prosecutor thinks about those. And I think that if you do some of those things on the front end, and you're working scenes with the police, and you know what the job of the police is because you've done the job of the police, and you know what the job of a prosecutor is because you've done the job of a prosecutor, you can help develop better cases. And I understand Mav's frustration over a lot of these unsolved murders. Between 2000 and 2007, I worked every murder there was in this city. Worked a couple out in the county, many of them unsolved. I worked them as the crime scene investigator. And I know and I've learned that if you can do those things that I'm talking about, will there still be maybe some unsolved murders? Probably. But I think we can definitely cut those down, okay? And Mr. Solomon also talked about, you know, solving some cold case murders and all that stuff. And one of them I didn't get a chance to mention the other night was Martin Holmes, who burned a house up in Karnak. 3 people were killed. He was indicted and tried for the murder of 2 people. He was already in the pen. He pled to 5 years, credit for time served, and he didn't even plead guilty to it. Actually, he pled not guilty, and no contest, which means that not saying you did it, not saying you didn't do it, but the court's going to find you guilty. Well, I'm not so sure that's a lot of justice and peace for victims. There needs to be some effort with these cold case murders, and that's one of the things I want to do because, again, going back I know how to work with the police, and I know what they can and can't do. And so that would be one of my goals. But a bigger goal is to try to prevent there ever being any more cold cases. Like I said, probably won't happen, but that's certainly my goal. And there are a lot of dismissals in this county, and these are not numbers, folks, that I've made up. These are 934 cases in the first 7 years of felony cases. And so these are individual indictments, okay? So sometimes you have an indictment with multiple paragraphs or multiple counts. And so say sexual assault is your indictment, and then indecency with a child by contact, indecency by exposure. And they plead to sexual assault. And yes, you do take into consideration the other two cases. Well, those two cases don't count towards the dismissals. The way the OCA does it is individual indictments, cause numbers, okay? So it's not really fair to say that those cases taken into consideration factor into that, because they actually don't. Again, if you don't believe me, go to the OCA and they will tell you that. But I think the problem is, and I've said this before, not because Mr. Solomon's a bad guy or anything else. I think they just don't have the background and experience that I do with my cop mentality to approach these cases. I think that when you're doing some of the things I've talked about, we have better cases that we can put together, and we can save taxpayer dollars, and we can make sure bad guys go to jail and good guys never get indicted. Because if you are dismissing 934 cases, one or two things happens. Someone innocent got indicted, or someone guilty walked. And I brought this evening. One of the capital murder that I sat second chair on, Joshua Reese. And I brought this just to show y'all, an indictment is just a charging instrument, okay? And in this, it says the state of Texas versus Joshua Stephen Reese, okay? And what it does is it lists out the defendant. It details briefly what they're accused of, and then it's signed, or the last sentence of it is, against the peace and dignity of the state, signed by the prosecutor, okay? The state of Texas, you people here in the room, everyone in this city, everyone in this county, are the victims. You give power to the state, and you are the victims, okay? We can't approach victims as clients, and the reason being, a big reason is if the example I gave the other night, someone breaks into your house, shoots you, steals from you, and then you've got a big heart, and a week later you say, well, I don't want to do anything to him, I think he just had a drug problem. Well, I've got to think about future dangerousness, okay? What if you're the next one he does it to? And so I'm sorry, you're not my client. I want to know what you think, but I'm not going to do that in that case, okay? Or let's say you're a victim of domestic violence, and you report that, and you get beat up by your husband, and then he tells you after he gets out of jail, you will go up there and file an affidavit of non-prosecution, or it's going to be worse next time, okay? I'm not going to do what you want to do in that case. I've got to think about future dangerousness. Sometimes we have to protect our victims from themselves even, okay? So I fundamentally disagree with that theory. I don't think it has to do with the cop mentality or anything else, but I have to look, as part of justice, future dangerousness for the rest of our community. And then finally, actually two more points I want to make, and one of them I talked about, and I tried to clear it up. The 300 cases that have been tried over the past 7 years, of course, that's felony and misdemeanor, okay? I'm not talking about misdemeanor cases. And I don't know that always trying a case is the best way to resolve a case. Do you realize how much money that takes? If you're putting a good case together, and I can tell you this from experience, 7 years of prosecution, you put a good case together, a defense attorney is not asking about guilt innocence. They're asking about time, okay? Well, I want 8 years. Well, my client will take 4. And maybe you can meet somewhere in the middle. And that's not a bad thing. That saves us money, and it gets someone put away. And say he does 5 or 6 years. If you think that's a walk in the park, I dare say anyone here, go do 5 or 6 years in the pen. I don't look at the number of trials as necessarily a good thing. Now he's talked about, Mr. Solomons talked about all the crime in Gregg County, although murder rate I think is down 17% from last year. I've not heard anything specifically about any of these bad numbers in Gregg County. In fact, in our dismissal rate, on average, is half of what it is here. And if you look at Upshur County, it's significantly lower. Talked about stuff in Shreveport, but no specific instances, okay? For the past 3.5 years, I have been prosecuting CPS cases. Okay, that's part of a criminal district attorney's job, all right? You represent CPS, and over the past 3.5 years, I have probably terminated the parental rights in about 75 to 100 cases. And I may mention this also at that debate. I did want to make one thing clear. I misspoke when I said that I had tried more cases than anyone. I meant CPS cases, but because Stacey Brown has been prosecuting 30 years, there's no way to prosecute one of her. But CPS cases are serious cases, and if you don't think they're serious, then let the state of Texas come get your kid and terminate your parental rights. I've tried those to juries, I've tried those to judges, and like I said, I've tried 75 to 100 of them. And that's probably being a little bit conservative. I make no apologies about defending the defenseless. That's why I got into law enforcement. That's why I became a prosecutor. There's nothing more defenseless than a newborn baby who's born positive for methamphetamine who can't turn to anyone else. I make no mistake. I make no apologies for it. I've also tried, and I think I threw off 3 examples the other night about prosecuting first sharing an arson, first sharing a felony theft, first sharing a burglary habitation. I've got a lot more criminal experience as well, okay? But my focus over the last 3.5 years, voluntarily I might add, is to look out for the children in our community because they can't protect themselves. So for all those reasons, I think I would be the best candidate to be your next district attorney. I think I've got a very wide path of existence, and I would look forward to bringing my experience to this county and doing some good for you. Appreciate it.